But do I think it's your CEO's job to govern what you do as a consenting adult in the bedroom? Like, absolutely not. I don't want to know anything about what anyone does who works for me in the bedroom. Welcome, everybody. We are doing a cancel culture, Joe Rogan, Business Insider, Dave Portnoy. What is happening in the media? What is the connection between politics, super PACs, free speech, misinformation, like the vortex of what is happening online, what's happening in American society, what's happening in the world, and who has the right to do what to whom and why. So my friend Steve Krakauer is here with me. Steve is the producer of many, many things, including Megyn Kelly's podcast, but even better than that, he writes a newsletter called The Fourth Watch, which I read pretty religiously. So Steve, welcome.
Thanks for being back, Erika.
Thanks. So let's start with you. Give the 30-second overview of what you think is happening and why it's happening.
Yeah, wow. I think that there is a moment which I think probably could be traced back pretty easily to 2015, 2016, and the rise of Donald Trump and the shock election in 2016. But I do think, even more recently, there's been a fear for a lot of different reasons. I think there's some financial reasons, there's some political reasons, there's some cultural reasons, where the grip that mainstream outlets, that people that had establishment power, that felt like they could never be swayed, they feel like they are losing that power in a very real and tangible way. And I think that through that fear, there's this lashing out at whether it's independent sources, whether it's what I would call counter consensus thought leaders like a Joe Rogan, and they don't really know how to crack down on this other than to wield this what I call like a anti-speech activism that the many media members are now participating in, and trying to find anything they can do to shut people up and to regain that power that they feel like they've lost.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way I would characterize things is I agree with you. I think the internet has done a couple things. One, it's democratized speech and the power that comes with the megaphone. The megaphone power, to your point, used to be controlled by channels on the dial, which were heavily produced, significantly edited, extremely controlled. And now anyone has a voice, has a platform, and can achieve a following. To achieve a following, the more shock value you have, the blunter you are, the more opinion you produce, the better off you are in achieving following. And I think one of the interesting things that the Trump era kind of created was a really shocking but powerful moment where political figures who are not supposed to use a platform for their own political gain and or opinion platform, you saw that happening in real time. I think the second piece that's very interesting is the internet has created something where you're just on camera or you're on mic all the time. The mic is always hot. And on broadcast, there was somebody watching somebody to make sure the mic wasn't turned on when you said the thing. I remember being at like a US Open golf thing and one of the Fox broadcasters said something really offensive about sex or whatnot. And there was this whole brouhaha at Fox about like, how do you hide it? How do you bury it? How do you make it go away? And I'm like, you can't make that shit go away. Like this is the world. But it also, there's so much visibility into what every single person is doing, and your history is alive. Like your history is alive. It's discoverable. It's able to be packaged, it's able to be manipulated, and it's able to be produced as a piece of content in its own right. So I kind of think you have these two things. And then to your point, there's something happening around control. There's something happening around this desire for justice or a desire for a higher power to control who says what to whom, when, and why, and with what safeguards. And to me, that's the crux of like where you see Joe Rogan, where you see, like, who else would you put in that bucket? I would put Dave in that bucket where he finds himself in that vortex all the time. Who else do you think is in that vortex?
Oh, for sure. I think those are two of the biggest ones right there. I mean, Dave and Joe Rogan. I think someone like a Tucker Carlson, I would probably put in that category much more than other people that are on Fox News, which I think that there's a very specific reason for that. I think there's some comedians. I look at someone like a Tim Dillon or Andrew Schultz, people that are, and I mean, what we're getting at, I think, are people that are not easily defined. I can't tell you I know there's an clip circulating of Joe Rogan saying that he's supporting Bernie Sanders that was actually shared by Bernie Sanders back in 2020. So I think that you can draw some messy conclusions about where Joe Rogan falls politically. But I think that what really has upended the system right now is the people that are gaining power are people that are not necessarily easily defined as like a right-wing person, a Republican, even someone like a Tucker Carlson who has very different points of view than the establishment Republican when it comes to things like getting involved in wars or even in cultural issues. And so I think that there's a real fear of that also, because I think that there's a hunger, and I actually think, you talk about this idea of misinformation, and this really, I think, rose to prominence during the era of COVID. These last 2 years have brought, in some ways, people having a very real fear of people misinterpreting the science or to not following the science. But we're also having that butt up against the idea that the quote science has been wrong so many times in this, and not because that they mean to do wrong, but it's because this is a totally new thing. But that has led to this total distrust. And when you have people that are curious, that are not jumping to conclusions that are hard to define, you get this consensus that is really fearful and wants to shut that down.
Do you think Chappelle's in this bucket?
Oh yeah, I think that's a great
Because
one,
I
right?
was
I mean,
gonna say,
Chappelle
like, is it just white men? Like, it's very in vogue to hate white men. Like, I feel like, oh, you're what? Like, I was watching the Dave Midas touch thing last night, and I was like, here's four white men talking about race and how black people should feel about the N word. Do you know what I mean? Like, how
yeah.
how is it an 80-20 that 80 like I feel like there's some right wing people, women who people don't like, but do you think this is a white male thing in a way?
I don't know. I think that there is. I guess the people that we just named are white men, and maybe there are some legitimate reasons that people say those are the top of the bucket. But I'll be honest, I think that my boss Megyn Kelly gets some of this also. I mean, she's not someone who's a right wing person. She happened to be on Fox, she happened to be on NBC, and I think that she gets put into this because she has points of view that are not necessarily easily defined either. And then I look at people like Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty, who have built this great following on YouTube, who are on one end of the spectrum versus the other, but they're also kind of counter consensus, counter cultural figures. People like Brianna Joy Gray, who I think does this really great work. She used to work for Bernie Sanders, certainly of the left, but has great conversations. Glenn Greenwald, someone who is a white guy, but also is gay and who is certainly not upright. I think that it's a little bit more complicated than just the white male. It's just these figures that, because of the Substacks, because of YouTube, because of podcasts, can gain real prominence. And I also think that there's some perception of prominence as well. I mean, Joe Rogan's at the very high end of the spectrum. He clearly is like getting, tens of millions of downloads per episode. But sometimes some of these people over-index on places like Twitter, which feel like they have a huge influence, like Glenn Greenwald or something, but maybe they don't actually have it, but it freaks the people that spend a lot of time on Twitter out.
It's scary enough. It's noisy enough.
Yeah.
Would you put Barry Weiss in this bucket?
Yeah, Barry, another great one.
I'd put Barry Weiss in this bucket. I love that about Barry Weiss. So basically, I think we're agreeing that much of this is really built on being outsiders. Like, these are people who have amassed their own following based on their own talent and aided by whatever platform they've been given. There is, because the internet is the future, there's a lot of money flowing to these people. Like, the $100 million to Rogan is nearly always mentioned, and almost mentioned as an affront or an insult to the people who don't like Rogan, who disagree with his curiosity or the types of views he allows to be discussed on his show, or that just don't like the fact that this is where money goes to these days. But money goes to audience, and money goes to people with followers. And that's, That to me is what's so interesting about this, which is I think you're right. I think the gatekeepers, the media elite are freaking out that there are people who are highly influential that the elite would not choose to be influential. Like they should not be
Oh,
there.
right, right. And it also is these, before this, we were talking about Dave talking with the Midas Touch guys. That's just this perfect example of Dave is someone who will have conversations with people he disagrees with, put it out publicly. And Barry Weiss and Joe Rogan. I mean, these are people that host conversations that are uncomfortable, that are intellectually interesting, and they're curious people. They'll talk to people that they disagree with, or maybe people that Joe Rogan has Alex Jones on. He has people like crazy conspiracy theorists. I mean, people might say that that's a little bit extreme, but that's a total philosophical difference right now than what's considered, what the mainstream media, the mainstream cultural forces will do. There's a very clear point of view where it's, we cannot platform these people. You cannot give them a platform. When I think having conversations is the best way to both show good ideas and bad ideas.
Completely. Yeah, no, it was interesting. I mean, I was reading the Midas Touch guys being like, we are the defenders of democracy, which I find to be a very arrogant statement. Like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like, aren't we all trying to defend democracy here in the good US of A? Like, come on. But I think you're right in that I actually think one of the things, part of the reason people tuned out of traditional media, beyond the fact that there was a faster, more real-time, more opinionated way to get information, is that it became about party line. Like you watch Fox, there's a party line, doesn't matter what show you're watching, at what time, on which version of the Fox Business, whatever. You watch CNBC or MSNBC, it's the same deal. And it's interesting to me. I think this is actually where the world is going, is it is the people who understand new mediums and who are curious about them and who are unafraid, and also who embrace their shortcomings and or flaws, who are gaining the most power. Like you look at crypto, right? Like that is the most, that's power to the people in a way that the media, I don't even think can get their head around, right? Which is completely decentralized, completely deaggregated. Why do you think, what do you think happens next?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that yeah, it is these people that are pushing against the mainstreams, the Joe Rogans that are going to have that, and they're also, you talk about mentioning their flaws. I mean, Joe Rogan has now apologized in very, I think, sincere ways twice, and I would argue that's done absolutely nothing to the people that want to quote unquote cancel him. I mean, there's no interest in an apology. These people want him to be deplatformed. They want the relationship between Spotify and him to end, and they really want to never hear from him again. That's the end game for these people. Spotify so far is holding strong, and they have lots of business reasons to do so. I don't know if they can continue to do that, but I think what's happening, and this really is unfortunate, is we're going to see this greater segmentation between the very, very large companies and the very, very niche independent companies, like essentially a person. Joe Rogan could leave Spotify tomorrow and build himself a business around himself like he did before, and he'll be fine financially. But that cuts off a certain element of an audience, but also a power. I think it's good for Joe Rogan to have a large audience. I think. I mean, again,
Yeah.
you may disagree with him, but I think that people that we disagree with should have large followings in some ways, because it's good to get a wide array of points of view. I don't think where we're going right now in the short term is going to be in a positive direction when it comes to this. I don't see the tide turning so fast on it, but I do think we're going to come and reach a point where the pendulum starts to swing the other direction, because it's not sustainable. Eventually, I mean, we're already seeing. I mean, look, with David's question to Midas Touch guys about whether they had once used the N word, or I should say, typed the N word rather than use or said or whatever you want to say. Maybe that we don't need to argue about whether it's any difference, but everyone's got something in their past. Like you said earlier, everyone's lives are online, have been out there. You could find some tweet from everyone that you can interpret in a way that you can try to cancel them for. So I do think that when enough people feel the weight of this themselves, there's going to be a pendulum swinging, but I don't think we're close to that yet. I
Yeah,
think we're
no.
still a year or two away from that happening.
I agree with that. I think that I think a couple things. Like I think it's disgusting if you watch that mashup video and you hear what Joe Rogan had to say. Like I completely disagree with all that. I don't listen to his show. I listened to one episode. I do like his curiosity though, and I like that he exists. I not the racist part of him, or people say he's sexist, but I don't listen. I don't know why they say that, but they say that about him. And I'm sure there's good reasons and bad reasons for why that's true or not true, whatever. But the debate is exactly what it's all about. I loved that video the other night with Dave and those guys, which is that we should be having debates. Like that's the whole point of this thing. Like the voter should be informed, the consumer should be informed, the reader should be informed. How do you know, the other thing I think is interesting, and I find myself in this position a lot, which is what's Daniel Ek's role? Like what's the CEO's role of the platform or of the place of employment for people in this situation? Like I think he's really held the line and said, free speech is important. We support our creators. He's obviously spent, I think he spent $2 billion on his podcast business, so he's not going to blow his star. But I think that's an interesting place. I get called to the table a lot about this with Dave. And, my thing is like, do I agree with everything Dave does? Absolutely not. Do I condone everything Dave does? Absolutely not. But do I think it's your CEO's job to govern what you do as a consenting adult in the bedroom? Like, absolutely not. I don't want to know anything about what anyone does who works for me in the bedroom. So like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a point of view that I would say makes a lot of sense. And I think, for example, like Joe Rogan, we don't know what he's doing in the bedroom, but the problem I think for someone like Spotify CEO is in some ways he wants it both ways. I mean, he wants to play the game of a corporate structure right now where the young people in your company have large outside voices. They have strong opinions on social justice and on certain issues, and if you cross them, I mean, we've seen this at media companies like the New York Times and many others. There could be repercussions for that, absolutely. So I do think that it's a little bit precarious right now for him. I don't think it's an easy decision for what he does next, although I certainly think he's going to be keeping Joe Rogan. But no, I mean, we can't be having the situation where a single dissenter can make the decision on what kind of content is acceptable and what kind of content is not acceptable. We have to be stronger. America, not to get all like, go America, but like, we need to be able to tell people like, you have choices. You can either listen or not listen. You can watch or not watch. Go find something else you like. Go build something else. Like, and don't smear everyone who enjoys something as a bad person. I mean, look, Joe Rogan. I remember I listened. I don't listen to every Joe Rogan. They're enormously long. But he had Ben Shapiro on one day, and then he had Snoop Dogg on the next day. And I was like, this is a great little microcosm of who he is. And,
what's the world?
Right. And yes, I think a lot of that compilation was clips from 5-10 years ago. I mean, this is a guy who has an archive of 1,500 episodes. I think those were disgusting comments that he made, and he said he would take all that back.
He said as much,
but I do think that we're going to have to have some, strength to push back against the very small minority of people that believe that things they don't like should be gone forever from everyone.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, look, like I was thinking about it last night, and I was saying to myself, like, okay, so Rogan's going to get canceled because, he said the N-word and he spread misinformation. Like, I don't actually see Joe Rogan spreading information. He had a contrarian scientist or a couple contrarian scientists on his podcast, and he provoked a conversation. But I guess that's misinformation. But then I'm like, okay, so we're going to cancel him for that. And the artists are going to step up and say, the folk singers are at the front of the line. Like, let's protest. We're relevant again. And then you get, I love India.Arie. And I'm like, what? Good for her. She shouldn't take your shit off of Spotify. Like, take your stuff off. You go. Like, I love India.Arie. I totally respect that decision. But then I'm like, where do we stop? Like, when I think about all of the rap songs on Spotify that I listen to and how they describe women and what they describe women doing, I'm like, are we going to get to a point with Spotify where that's not allowed? Like, where do you, it's so nuanced and it's so gray. I think the one of the things that's disturbing about where we are in the world is how insidious it is. Like, I think the conversation with Dave and the Midas Touch guys, it isn't that interesting. It's an argument with Dave Portnoy on the internet. I guess that's kind of, it's interesting. It's entertaining, I would say. But I think what's interesting about it is you have a super PAC whose position is freedom of speech or defending democracy, who's actively playing a role in content creation that pursues a political agenda. You know, we see it with Business Insider, which is, lo and behold, Business Insider pieces only drop on one day. They drop the day before Penn earnings, like never fail, like it's Business Insider days, the day before Penn earnings call. So there is a machine at work, which I find really disturbing. I think that that's part of what's so disheartening. And then I think the other thing is, like, the whole thing is designed to make everybody uncomfortable. Like, we're in an era where media and content can make you uncomfortable. And employees are going to be uncomfortable, investors are going to be uncomfortable, viewers are going to be uncomfortable, and everyone has free choice. So it's like, you don't want to be uncomfortable, then opt out, to your point, and go do something else. I think what people want that I disagree with is they want the discomfort taken away. And I
Right.
think that's actually what's most disturbing about what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's funny the way you described it with the Midas Touch guys and Business Insider does bring up a level of, look, the Midas Touch guys are they're gaining power. They're doing this on social media.
I mean, they had a
make these viral
great
moments.
night. Their followership
Yeah,
has gone, they've had the Dave Portnoy effect. Like,
absolutely. And they're shady in the way they describe it. But look, at the end of the day, they're political operatives, and they are in some ways clear about the explicit goals that they want, which is
which is
electing the
great.
kind of people that they like.
Yep.
What I worry even more about is the Business Insider stuff,
Yep.
because what you expect from Business Insider, I mean, look, they're not, the New York Times or the Associated Press, but you expect truth from Business Insider. You expect some level of most people don't spend their days on Twitter or even reading all the evidence that Dave's got this text and that. Most people don't have the time for that, but they might see a headline, they might catch a little bit of it, or they might hear it secondhand. And when you have a news organization that seems so disinterested in the truth, so disinterested in correcting the record, and becomes clear about what the objective is, what the narrative they're trying to portray, that's what really makes me scared. And what actually starts to make me say, that's what makes people lose trust in everything.
Yeah,
If
I agree
this
with
can
that.
be done, then what do we trust?
Yeah, what do we trust in? Who's telling the truth? I agree with you. I didn't love the brothers, but I was like, at least they're honest and fairly,
Yeah.
like, defensive about what they have, pride in what they do. BI is a faceless, nameless internet publication, which is quite powerful and has made its business, they're the new Gawker, right? And so who do you trust? Who's telling the truth? What's everybody's motive? Why do they have that motive? How did they get to be powerful? So I think those are all questions. I agree with you. I think the pendulum is only going further one way, and hopefully it comes back to someplace rational and normal. But I think until then, everyone's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the only solace I take in it is I think the average person is starting to wake up to it a little bit. I mean, I think that there's a reason why people like Joe Rogan, a reason why people like Dave and Barstool Sports has continued to gain in prominence. Well, the viewership and the prominence of places like the CNNs of the world is declining. It's because people are seeing that, and because people are going elsewhere for what they want for their information.
Completely. So, Steve, thanks for having this conversation. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you. You can subscribe to Fourth Watch newsletter. It's fourthwatch.media, and the Megyn Kelly Show every day on SiriusXM at noon.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for listening.